Hello there guys, what is going on? Daniel Childs back here again for another show. I hope you're doing really well on this Monday, even though the weekend wasn't good, but hopefully Chelsea can cheer us up in midweek against Blackburn. This is another edition of Added Time where I answer your questions. I'm doing this a little bit on short notice. I am actually recording this a day earlier than usual on a Sunday afternoon because by the time you're watching or listening to this, I will be stateside. I will be in New York City, of all places, for a week's holiday. But I wanted to give you some content before then. Please go and check out my player ratings. That's a new feature I'm going to be doing post-game, and then also my rational perspective if you want to hear my full thoughts on the Brentford game, if you can bear it and are interested or haven't caught up with it yet. It is on the YouTube channel and also on the podcast feed. But let's get into your questions. So, firstly here, we've got quite an angry one. I'm trying to be fair. I think, there is frustration, obviously, after a result like that and what we've seen in recent times from Chelsea. But Pav here asks, when are directors going to be held accountable? Threw away $1 billion and we're nowhere near. Academy ripped to shreds in favour of inferior youngsters. Awful squad composition, and they want another centre-back in Jan. They have no clue how to construct a title-winning squad. So I think there's a lot there, and there is stuff there in terms of the youngsters. I have expressed concern before about the selling off of youngsters. I expressed it in a news show last week that the fact that Conor Gallagher's contract still remains unresolved is astonishing. It really is, given his level of performance and importance to Mauricio Pochettino. Trevor Chalobah, the way that situation looks to be ending now, where he's probably going to move in January. He's been injured for the start of the season, but it looks like he's very likely moving on. And the way Mason Mount, that situation played out was one that was quite sad, very sad over the summer. It really was. And there is a concern personally from me that by the time we reach 2-3 years down the line, are we going to see any academy products in the first team? And when you are buying young players from other areas, whether that be South America, whether that be from other Premier League clubs, that does block a pathway. I know people scoff sometimes at that expression, but that's what it is. You are buying those players, especially for large fees, and it's not the case that those are all wrong decisions. There is collateral damage to making those choices. And it's, what do you want? Do you want to take that risk of maybe spending money, arguably wasting it in the long term when you could have actually saved money by promoting from within? That is a philosophical debate, I think, in terms of a direction debate, but I think it also is a valid one in terms of the long term. In terms of our directors and in terms of the transfers and wasting $1 billion and why aren't we close to a title, obviously the contrast with Spurs doesn't help Chelsea, doesn't help his ownership, doesn't help Pochettino, in the sense that Postecoglou has come in there and he's made a huge difference very early on. They didn't have a squad overhaul. They were arguably in a similar to worse position than Chelsea in recent years, and they are right now at the top of the league. Will that last the whole season? Not entirely sure, but they're enjoying life. A coach has made a tangible difference to life there. He really has. So why hasn't it happened at Chelsea yet? We've spent more than them. There are a few factors, absolutely, for me, that you have to take into account. A squad overhaul, a massive turnover of players. Partly that was the fault of the current ownership, but it also was the lag from the previous ownership of players that we needed to get rid of. Then also the injury crisis. And I know people, again, will just scream excuses. And it's not to say that you can't be critical of what we've seen so far this season, but when you lose a player like Christopher Nkunku, if James Maddison got injured on the eve of this season, no one can convince me that doesn't have a really negative impact on Ange's plans for Spurs, because he is an integral player to that system. He makes everyone look better. If Heung-min Son got injured at the start of this season, if he had 12 injuries to contend with, and it's all right, you can spend $1 billion, but you can get 12 injuries and that's still going to hurt you. You can spend as much as you want, but if you lose key players consistently and it knocks you back every single week basically, and you can't get a regular starting 11 out there, again, I don't know what coaching world football. That's not to say that Chelsea need to have a small violin and everyone needs to feel sorry for Chelsea. They aren't going to feel sorry for Chelsea, but it is just looking at the reality. And if we had the majority of our squad fit, I think we play better. I think a player like Nkunku makes a huge difference. I think if Reece James is fit 9 times out of 10, I think it makes a huge difference. I think if Ben Chilwell's fit 9 times out of 10, he makes a huge difference. Wesley Fofana, Benoit Badiashile, these players make a difference, and I don't think it's excuse making to point that out. So to try and come to an answer of why we are where we are. And I also think on the case of a title winning squad, I think the majority of the business we've done since January, the majority of it, I think, has been good business. I think it's based on what I'm seeing regularly from players now, when they're actually given time on the pitch, a player like Mykhailo Mudryk, Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, Axel Disasi, Benoit Badiashile, obviously last season, I think these are players who look to be a real positive. And although Nicholas Jackson's getting a lot of stick right now, I think he did have a good start to the season. Cole Palmer, I think, looks like a bargain. Arguably the bargain of the season if he continues influencing things the way he is for Chelsea. So to completely write off this strategy also doesn't take into account the experience that people keep crying out for, that I do think is valid in certain cases. Like if you wanted, I made this point specifically in the striker area. Was there someone out there of an older age who could come in and help to rotate with Breuer and Jackson? An Olivier Giroud type player that could have helped us. I do think that situation is going to be addressed in January now. I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be addressed in January now, and Pochettino basically admitted it in Friday's press conference. But the idea that experience is just a be-all and end-all. You have to explain last season. You have to explain recent seasons when experienced, kind of obvious signings came in and didn't provide an uplift, didn't transform the team in the way we hoped they would. Now, we are no closer to winning a title than the last time we did, but I'm someone who would like to take a longer-term approach. It doesn't mean that Pochettino and the ownership are given extended, unlimited time with no scrutiny, no pressure, no criticism. That's obviously silly. You have to be objective. What we have with Potter last season, and although I have some sympathy with people who are kind of pointing out now, what's the difference between Potter and Pochettino in terms of the struggles both of those coaches are facing, and actually the wider reality of Chelsea's struggles. You don't just get to lose every single week and look hopeless. I don't think Pochettino's team has looked hopeless, in my opinion. That was a long answer, but this is Kedgebringer, who asks, now that the Blackburn game is a must-win, starting Petrovic seems risky. Carabao Cup games are a must-win if you need a second. What is your solution to this constant low block problem? Is it Mudryk and his speed? I still would start Petrovic. I would. I think that he has got to be given a chance at some point. That's why you bought a second goalkeeper after Kepa left. You've got to have that rotation for me. And when does he get the start? If you're not throwing him into this game just because you've lost the last game, when does he get a chance? I mean, are you waiting till the FA Cup third round in January when maybe Chelsea face a non-league side? What if we're coming off the back of a defeat into that game? Is that the same? I just feel that rotation needs to happen. I think a similar argument could be made about throwing a player who's just back from injury like Benoit Badiashile into the firing line. Ugo Chukwu played against Brighton. I don't think many people would have put him in the starting lineup, but he played. And although he was shaky, you need to give these players a chance to fail or to succeed. And I think we need to see that. Everyone kept calling for Mudryk to get a run in the team. And until we saw him in the team, you didn't know his level of quality. Petrovic, I think, is the same. And this is just one game in the Carabao Cup that even with Petrovic in goal, I expect Chelsea should be beating Blackburn, who championship team at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea should be winning it. In terms of the second one, I think in terms of the low block problem, it's not the case that Chelsea are creating nothing. I think there are definitely worse times when Chelsea were creating barely anything against teams with this strategy. We clearly made clear-cut chances in the first half. The idea that we created nothing, again, just doesn't bear out. It's the finishing that has been a major problem this season. It has been in recent seasons, but I think even more so this season, because we are actually creating a high volume of what I would deem to be decent to good chances. And you do need your attackers, if you want to be a really good team, to overperform, to outperform that XG. It's all right creating XG. The best teams have players who are able to exceed that at times, to be really ruthless. And unfortunately, we're not being so. I do agree with you, though, that having a player like Mudryk, having a player like Enzo Fernandez, having Reece James start at full fitness to create those overlaps, or even Malo Gusto, it's a shame that he didn't start on Saturday, because I think the overlaps you get and the way you're able to maybe get overloads, pull players out of position. And we know the goal scoring threats of players like Ben Chilwell and Reece James, how influential they can be. And Enzo with his progressive passing, I do think it makes a huge difference in the long term, getting a more healthier squad that can have players who are going to be more expressive. And also psychologically, I want to see Chelsea be a lot more confident after going 1-0 down. I know it's hard. That's the intangible thing about football. Goals obviously change games, but the fact that we were so languid and looked so passive or just so safe after the first goal for Brentford was just such a shame. When in the first half we were pinning them back, we were trying to create openings. The fact that died down was a real shame and needs to be resolved in the long term. And that's not just based on personnel. I think that's maybe based on strategy too. And here, this is going to be the final one today because we have given some long answers. Has the fortress Stamford Bridge fallen? Chelsea being one of the teams to have the worst record at home since last 2 seasons. Do players fear to play at home? That's from Rax Murray. I agree that Stamford Bridge is not the place it used to be. You know, you think back to, and it feels like it's not just decades, it feels like centuries ago when Jose Mourinho had a team at Stamford Bridge who were imperious, were so commanding, and there would genuinely be, I think, a situation. It's again a bit of a cliche, but there were times at the Bridge where you felt like teams would come already beaten, or the moment Chelsea went 1-0 up in a game at Stamford Bridge under Jose, they were winning the game. And we have had better records, decent records at home in recent seasons. I think it seemed like under Tuchel that had started to be resolved a little bit, but then really tailed off after the sanctions in the second half of that season. It obviously was atrocious last year, and so far this year hasn't been good. And the fact that I think it's one Premier League win at home in 13 is just absolute insanity. And you cannot, a bit like the goal scoring problem, if you can't make your home ground a regular bankable place for wins, there's very little you can do as a football team. It's not just about winning the Premier League title. I mean, Chelsea, at least when we weren't winning Premier League titles in recent years, did enough at home to get enough points to get in the top 4. It's a real issue. I think it's a psychological one. I think it's a cultural one. I think there is a clear issue at home, especially against teams like Brentford, where the atmosphere just isn't as intense. This has been a long problem, and it's not a Chelsea-centric one in terms of the expectation of people come, they sit down at Stamford Bridge and they expect, rather than, you know, it's not that they don't demand, but I do get this friction and tension inside. Stamford Bridge is a tense place most of the time. I think there is a difference when we play an Arsenal, a Liverpool, a Man City, a Man United, because there is an inbuilt rivalry. Those games are, you know, we know Chelsea have to play well and they're coming up against a very good team. And I think the rivalry against those teams make fans come out in force. And usually those games are played at more preferable times. You find either a 5:30 kickoff, a 4:30 kickoff. The 12:30s are never great. They never are. And even when big ones are played there, I understand. I don't think they're the best for atmosphere in any ground, really. They just are. Everyone's kind of sluggish, but that doesn't mean the players have to be sluggish. Of course, it is a balance, right? And wins and good performances will gain that connection and build that positivity over a period of time. 15-16, even though it was one kind of anomaly year for that group of players, you think about how toxic it felt at times during that season. Conte comes in and the mood changes. But I do think this is a longer period of just caution, and I feel it does transmit onto the players. I think that fear, maybe inbuilt fear from Chelsea fans that things are going to go wrong again, and maybe the sense of just anger and frustration and anxiety over what has happened in recent years at Chelsea. I don't know who it was I was speaking. I think it was Gary Hayes who brought this up, and it was an amazing point. And I think people still just don't comprehend maybe or appreciate how much of an impact that sanctions period had and how much upheaval we have seen at this football club over the past 12, 18 months. I mean, it's just been insanity. And that's with the inbuilt history of Chelsea being a chaotic club that is predictably unpredictable, that does have these massive ups and massive downs as well. And I think it's coming to terms with maybe a new reality for Chelsea fans that is quite difficult. And it's not to say that being mid-table is acceptable. That's not what I'm saying with a new reality, but just that it isn't like what it was in 2005, and people, a bit like maybe Man United fans, are constantly harking back to the past and want to see an old Chelsea that isn't coming back. And I think that balancing act is a very difficult one for this ownership, who are already under scrutiny, already have done things that has aggrieved fans, I think rightly. I don't know what the solution is, and I think that's a real bleak point, but I know this is the most obvious thing I could say right now, but it is going to be Chelsea and Pochettino finding a way to win big games and growing that connection that way. I think that's the only and easiest and quickest way to find it. We can sit here all day and talk about historical things, cultural things, the maybe the entitlement of some. But if Chelsea are winning Stamford Bridge, is a much nicer place. That's obvious, and they need to find a way to start winning consistently there, because then naturally this kind of feeling of dread at Stamford Bridge will slowly turn around. So they need to start doing it quickly. So that is it for today's episode of Added Time. Thank you for submitting your questions. You can follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, TikTok, X, Instagram, all of that good stuff. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to turn those notifications on, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.